have the feeling everybody knows already who's coming up because I have the feeling that's why you all sit in the audience early. But nevertheless, it's a particular privilege for me to have the chance to welcome our first keynote speaker, Yossi Matias. Yossi is on the leadership team of Google Research. He's driven and built many, many innovations that all of you and billions of other people have used. He's the global lead of Google's Health AI and Climate Crisis AI, and he's a leading pioneering efforts in conversational AI, which, as I said earlier, is a key innovation like driving many of us these days. He's a world-renowned expert in artificial intelligence and then the leadership of global products and innovations. And he's leading a global team working on impact-driven research, innovation, and moonshots, advancing AI for the benefits of society, which I guess like many of us are pondering, like, what is gonna AI do? I'm worried that AI is gonna replace me on stage, so I hope we'll do it for positive societal change and impact. So with that, Yossi was also previously on Google search leadership for over a decade. So I'm sure with all the impact that he's been able to drive there, the conversational AI and all the other topics, we'll see like amazing advances. And he'll share his insights on how AI innovation can drive societal change. And with that, I please ask you to give a super warm welcome to Yossi Matias. Thank you for joining us. And Yossi also said if he finishes early, he'll take a few audience questions. So get all prepped, like as Yossi talks, what you want to ever ask him. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Philip. And thanks to everybody for being here. It's wonderful to be here. Bună dimineața, I guess. Yeah, there are multiple reasons why I'm excited to be here. First, to see this audience, and I saw the vibe out there, and I think the mayor said about the connection between technology, nature, and human beings, and I would add culture and heritage, which is also very important. So wonderful to be in a place that has this kind of long history and see that all this innovation is happening and also these beautiful hills around us. So wonderful to be here. Another personal note, my parents actually grew up in Transylvania, so before moving to Israel, where I was born. So you already heard everything I know in Romanian. But another good reason to be happy to be here. But the topic that we're talking about is something that I'm really excited about. And obviously AI is capturing everybody's attention, and rightfully so, because AI is transformative. So I'm going to try and share with you some of the reasons why I'm so excited about where we're at. And this is really historical moment because AI is transformative. We see today things that we haven't seen, 2 years ago, actually. Many of the things that happen today could not be anticipated, perhaps. I mean, we were expecting to see transformation, but the pace is accelerating. And importantly, everybody can be part of this transformation, and the opportunity is greater for everyone than even before. So let me try and touch on some of those. And, so as I mentioned, AI is impacting every aspect of life. And we see that in an increasing pace. In areas that actually took a long time, we see now that it's actually making changes in various ways. So I'll try to talk, before even going into the examples of how it's transforming life, I should mention that there are also many considerations about what the implications are on society. And it's something that we really need to pay a lot of attention to. And we like to think about advancing AI in what we call bold and responsible way. And to do that, we need to be responsible from the beginning. So Google already published what we call the AI principles several years ago, and as ways for us to consider everything that we do in AI, not only in how we're thinking about what we develop, but also to try to proactively make progress towards these goals. So starting to be socially beneficial, to avoid reinforcing unfair bias, And I'm actually an optimist. I think that we have an opportunity to take bias. AI has the risk that if you just put in various training data sets, and the training data sets have inherent bias because of society, then it's going to reinforce them. But conversely, we have the opportunity to actually look in a more rigorous way and see how to actually do a better job than we currently do as a society, because we can intentionally ask ourselves, how do we want the AI system to actually operate? And what are the values that we want it to do? And hopefully, we can do a better job than we currently doing, without AI. We want it to be tested, to be safe, which is a big issue. Now you see some calls and risks and people concerned about even existential risks in the future. And I think that these questions need to be considered very seriously. Again, I think that we can do a lot about it, and the reason why we should consider them seriously is to take the right measures and right action to make sure that we actually take this amazing technology and we harness it in a way that is going to be positive and reduce, eliminate, and curb risk. Obviously, we want to be accountable for people. Privacy is an important topic that we want to always be, considerate for. And needless to say, we want to uphold it to highest scientific standards. And there's a lot of work to be done. In fact, we are in this bizarre situation right now that we have technology where the technology is, the science still needs to figure out and have a better understanding of some of what we already can operate in the field, which is hugely important, and I'd like to see more of that work going on. And of course, we'd like it to be as a force of equitability, of accessibility, to make it beneficial for everybody. So there's a lot of things that we want to take care of, and it's really important that everybody working on AI is thinking about these issues from the beginning, not as an after the fact. And again, it's very similar to security. Nobody is building a system just to later say, okay, now let's see how to make it secure. You really need to think about it from the beginning, and so we do with AI. With that, I'd like to touch on 3 areas where AI is already impacting society, and I think these are just examples of how it's going to impact society even better for the future. But it's already saving lives, it's already improving lives, and again, to me, this is just kind of the beginning of the opportunities there. So I'll touch on 3 areas that are close to my day-to-day attention. One is about the climate, the other one about conversational AI, and the third one is about health AI. So let me start with climate AI. And of course, with climate change and what's going on around us, the fear of the impact of the climate change is something that we should all be concerned about. I was one of the colleagues of our delegate to COP27, where we're also already talking about climate, both mitigation and adaptation. And it's really something that we need to take action now. So there are goals for us to do by 2030 that we should all care about. Now, there's a role for technology to play here. And again, I think there's a lot that we can do in combined especially. And when I say we, I mean both what we can do within our teams, but also what we can do as a society and globally. And this is an opportunity that is open for everyone. Now, I'm a great fan of working with startups, with the ecosystem. So we also have this initiative that we call Startups for Sustainable Development, where we're working with startups around the world who are working on SDGs, so-called Sustainable Development Goals that the UN has set up, including about global warming and other sustainable goals. And we are mentoring over 400 startups in this kind of capacity and look for other ways to actually make a difference. Let me describe a few things that we're doing actually in-house. So Google has been one of the first company, perhaps the first company to declare the goal to be carbon neutral. This was going back a few years ago, and a couple of years ago we actually made a bolder statement. We'd like to be net zero. So essentially we're aiming soonish to be in a situation that in any given moment, in any given place on the planet, the carbon that we produce is negative, not only offsetting after the fact in the aggregate, etc. And in order to get there, we need to look into various areas, including what we're doing on our own operations, but also what kind of technologies we can contribute towards doing that. So let me share with you one example that I'm excited for multiple reasons. I set up an effort. I asked the team to come up with various ideas for what can we do for mitigations. And after many fancy ideas that we were considering, and some of them still do, one idea that actually came to the top actually came up over a dinner conversation by one of our engineers with his wife. Is particularly simple, and this is something that I find very compelling. So the observation is the following. It turns out that a lot of the carbon emitted every day is actually from cars in the city. That's something that everybody would expect. But much of it is actually by cars actually waiting in traffic light. And much of it is actually by cars starting to drive and stop. We're all familiar with that as drivers. It's not a great experience, obviously. Turns out this is also a contributor, which is quite significant for carbon. So the question was, well, can we actually take a look at what's going on in the intersections around the world and apply machine learning to try and see if we can do a better job in just scheduling the traffic lights? And we started the pilot, and the idea was, well, we actually have some information, aggregated information on maps and ways, and we can look into what's going on within intersections. So let's feed it in, let's build some optimization algorithms and see whether we can do a better scheduling. For example, we can take an intersection and have one of the lights stay for another 3 seconds, and in a way that would optimize the traffic. So we ran a few pilots, in various places in the world, and it turns out that actually by a simple scheduling, we could reduce the carbon emitted. This is a result of 10%, is a result of what we've seen in a recent pilot that we did in Hamburg, Germany. But we ran pilots in various places, any place from Rio to Bangalore to Seattle to Hamburg, and actually started in Israel. So the idea is that no installation is required. You can actually just suggest to the city to make a small change. Now, the beauty here is that this is a low-hanging fruit in terms of deployment, but it does move the needle. And if you multiply that by thousands of intersections around the world, suddenly you actually can see that we can move the needle. And of course, this also calls a call for action. What other ideas are there? What else can we do in order to reduce, to have carbon emission mitigation? Which I think is makes me optimistic, because when you find solutions that are actually so practical, so effective, and can move the needle, and you take a few of those, then it makes a difference. This is about climate mitigation. One of the main themes, actually the main theme for in COP27, was about climate adaptation. So unfortunately, the global warming already kind of started happening. We actually see that. And I see that very much. I'm also overseeing an effort called Crisis Response at Google, where we're looking into how can we provide information to people during crisis. And we see an increase in floods, in wildfires, in storms, and each of them actually is a situation that people actually are put in danger, and they are actually turning to Google to look for information. In fact, our more recent push into crisis response is a result of a few incidents back in 2015, where people were looking for information, actionable information. What do I do? There's a flood going on. So these are kind of charts showing, there's a peak. If you go to Google Trends, which shows the popularity of search queries, every time there's a crisis, every time something happens, people are turning to Google to see what's going on, what should I be doing, what should I do to keep safe. So we actually put out, within search and maps, we put out a feature called SOS Alerts, and which essentially, typically within an hour of a major event, provides these kind of answers to these questions. And this was also used, by the way, during COVID-19, and it's been quite helpful to many people. So since launching it some 5 years ago, it had over 4 billion views. So obviously many people were using this information. People are turning to Google to look for information. However, a few years ago, when we already had SOS Alerts, I realized that one of the most devastating natural disasters were not very helpful. So floods are actually impacting millions of people every year. There are estimated thousands of casualties every year, and many millions or sometimes billion in economic damages. And the only way, practical way to help with floods, of course, except for preventing them, is being able to alert people ahead of the time so that we give them heads up. And a few years ago, when we looked around, we couldn't find any way in which we could actually notify people about floods coming their way. So we set up this kind of moonshot to see whether we can use AI in order to help with that. And to be honest, when starting it, I wasn't sure whether we can do anything about it. And this was actually quite important. In fact, this is a picture, a video that was taken in a village called Narwar in Bihar in India. These floods came out in the middle of the night. People were totally unexpecting it. There were a few casualties. Actually, there would be many more casualties if not for this person, Rakesh, standing next to me. This was actually during a field visit that we had with my team there to understand what's going on the ground. He and two of his friends actually saved quite a few people during the night because they were kind of bringing them to safety. And you can actually see behind us the stranded families in the shelter. And you can see in the background the village as it is currently was back in 2018. So the question is, can we actually use technology in order to give prediction about what's going on ahead of time? And it turns out that with driving the science, driving technology, and when I say driving science, this is collaborative work with academics, where we're looking into the combination of hydrology, the physics of water going through some surfaces, and machine learning models, which are based on essentially many factors that come into play. We were able to make a difference. So we launched a small pilot in India just back in 2018. We expanded it times 10. A couple of years later, we already had 2021. So a couple of years ago, we already sent out 115 million notifications to people at risk in India and Bangladesh about floods coming their way a few hours before they actually did. And just a couple of weeks ago, we updated that now we already expanded our flood prediction to cover predictions in 80 countries around the world. And we put the information available to everybody, to people, to organizations, to governments, in what we call Flood Hub, so everybody can actually watch that. It's covering population of 460 million people. And extending the heads up just to what previously we had 48 hours, now we have up to 7 days in advance. So up to 7 days in advance, sometime you can actually see a red dot on the Flood Hub, which would indicate that there's an estimation that there's going to be an unusual flood coming to that area so that people can actually take action. And also working with agencies, with NGOs, including asking ourselves, well, can we, it turns out that in order to get the information dissemination, there are multiple ways to do that. Some of it we're trying to put it also in search and in maps whenever possible, but also working with NGOs on the ground to work with volunteers in various villages, and even exploring a way to see whether we can work with organizations such as Give Directly in Africa to see whether we can provide give them heads up so they can provide funding ahead of the flood for people to actually take action and remain safe. So this is kind of work in progress, and we're also collaborating with the World Meteorological Organization and many other players. This is kind of a global problems. And in a way, we're just at the beginning. There's much more to be done. We want to do it globally. This is only river and floods, so these are floods where the river goes overboard and floods the villages around it, but there are many other flooding problems such as flash floods, urban floods, and others that need attention, and there's a lot of work to be done. But again, in order to get there, and as I mentioned when we started this effort, it wasn't clear that we can do anything about it. In order to get there, we needed to bring together many technologies to drive the scientific research. In fact, the team published over a dozen papers, including 2 of the most downloaded papers in leading hydrology journals. And the way simplistically that it works is that first we need to understand how the river goes, so we need to have a good, what we call data elevation model that is created by taking satellite imagery and then building these 3D models using AI. Then we need to understand what's going on, what we call hydrology model, where it's about if I know that much water is going to go from one place, how much water should I expect in a few days in that other place? So you need to somehow estimate that. In order to do these estimations, we need to have this combination of hydrology, the physics of hydrology, combined with machine learning models that are based on experience of the historical data that we have. Now, data is obviously very important, so to that end, we also put out a project called Caravan, which we published in Nature Science, where we encourage others to actually put their data there so that everybody could use. We also take our own models and make them available in GitHub as an open source, and looking to see how to bring all these together. Now, in addition to these hydrology models, we also need to have so-called inundation models, which essentially are if I estimate this amount of water to get to a particular locale, what is the impact going to be on the surrounding? And when I say impact, the questions are not only where the water is going to be, but one thing that I actually learned in our field survey a few years ago is that people really care about how deep the water is going to be, because that means whether they need to evacuate or not. If it's very shallow, it's, well, it's a hassle, but perhaps not as dangerous. So there are many of these questions, and this is just an example of how AI can actually play a role in all of these to help out. I will also mention that there's a lot of work on wildfire detection, looking to see whether we can also do prediction, earthquake analysis, and I know there was an earthquake in Romania just last night, and thankfully without victims, so really glad to hear that. But again, there's more that can be done in order to help people, and we have this technology that tries to alert people who are far from the epicenter so that they can have a few seconds of heads up so they can actually take action. And there's more and more that can be done. And again, I think this is only makes me optimistic that the problem that seemed to be impossible to address just a few years ago is actually now having a very effective solution, even though there's much work to be done. With that, let me switch to conversational AI, totally different domain. And of course, everyone is now an expert on conversational AI. Presumably, many of you tried out ChatGPT or Bard, and also appreciate the opportunities that are going there. Now, I've been working on conversational AI for a few years now, and exciting to see the progress we're making in this field. So some of you may remember Duplex, Google Duplex, which my team has developed a few years ago. We announced it 5 years ago about how we can actually have an AI bot making phone call conversation and get stuff done. Got a lot of attention because I think for many it was the first time that they realized that an AI can actually handle a conversation like a person would do. And turns out, by the way, this is a highly important capability to actually handle this kind of conversation. In fact, during COVID, turns out that one of the big problems that many small businesses around the world encountered is that people didn't know whether a store is open or closed. So every day they didn't know whether they need to go to the store, if it's going to be open, and if they're going to have curbside and whatnot. And the only way actually to get this information, because most stores do not update their information online on a regular basis, was actually to actually make a call. So we actually put Duplex to work, and we made calls every day to millions of businesses, mostly in the US, but we expanded to other countries, and just figuring out the business information, making sure that it's available for everybody in search and map, so that people actually don't need to do the call themselves, and business don't lose business. Now, we just shared a couple of weeks ago that so far, the number of views of people of business information made available by Duplex exceeded 1 trillion. 1 trillion. So a lot of value created for businesses, for people, just by having an AI work for them. Now, Duplex was announced 5 years ago, but what we're seeing in the last 2 years, of course, is a progression that is totally new domain, which is about generative AI and what can be done with that. And when we talk generative AI, it has, of course, the creative aspect. So, for example, this image on the right is about is coming from automatically generated by putting a prompt, a text prompt, essentially of something like a small bear on a cab in New York. And as you can see, it actually put this kind of generates the image with a way that you'd expect actually perhaps a creator to put it out there. Now, the picture of the left is actually a picture I took with my camera on the piano. I got it as a present from my son, who made a prompt. A father plays autumn leaves on the piano to his girls on a beach. Autumn Leaves is one of my favorite tunes to play on the piano, so I really appreciated this. And when you look at that, you can appreciate that actually it did a pretty creative work. And interestingly enough, the autumn leaves are now on the ground, and there's a totally different conversation to consider. Do we consider that kind of a total misunderstanding of the model, that it takes the name of the song and actually creates autumn leaves on the ground, or it's a brilliant creative idea that actually it kind of takes this association? Totally different conversation about what's creativity and what does it mean and how do we appreciate these results? Do we care about the outcome, or do we create about the creative process? Again, fascinating topic that is worthwhile, but it's a powerful tool that can empower everybody to express themselves, and it's obviously transformative to many. And you know, when thinking about what we can do with conversational AI, there's so many things to do. So let me actually share something we did even before the last wave of conversational experience. In fact, where large language model just happened, and we realized that large language models can actually understand people. We looked into a problem of people. We have this project at Google, Grow with Google, where we let people have certificates. Professional certificates, but we heard from them that after they learn some skills, such as in IT or finance, the biggest hurdle is actually to pass an interview. So we tried out this so-called interview warm-up, where we let people practice interview with an AI bot that can understand them and give them feedback. Now, the good news is that when you give feedback, you don't actually generate new content, you just refer to the other content, so we overcome all the problems of hallucinations, etc., that are still not perfect in large language models. And it turns out that this is extremely helpful for people. And if you think about the implications for skilling and education and tutoring, then these are pretty foundational. Lemon is one example, a person who said that for him, this actually made the difference and it helped him land a job. And we heard that from many other who use this technology. So this is one example, of course. But of course, there are many more opportunities for large language models. Obviously, there are many questions about how to make sure that they are in line with the AI principles that I mentioned. So actually, one of the topics that are top of mind for me and my team is to make sure that they are consistent and factual. But that's a subject for a different talk, perhaps. Let me switch in the time that is left to the third area that I'm really excited about, because healthcare is where AI, I believe, is going to make the biggest difference in the years to come in terms of saving lives and impact people's quality of life. And we already have many examples where this can be done, and now it's a turning point. I think we're at an inflection point. Let me start actually with the most recent work that my team has been doing, which is actually the intersection of healthcare and language models. Well, we asked ourselves, with the language models that currently can understand content, and actually also provide information about content so wonderfully, can we bring it together in a way that will be effective? So to that end, we took Palm, which is one of our language models that we made, we published, and we fine-tuned it. We actually gave it more information, which is from medical information, but also question and answers that we had. And we built this model that we called MedPalm. And for the first time, we tested it against various exams in the style of the US medical exams. And for the first time, we had a language model that actually passed the US medical exams in the score of 67%. And a few months later, we actually built it on an even more powerful model. And for the first time, we had a language model that passed the US medical exam in an expert level, 85%, which has huge implications because now suddenly you have an AI system that can be helpful to address questions in the medical domain. So think about opportunities for empowering doctors, for helping healthcare systems. Now, there are still many open questions of how to use it, actually, because healthcare is one area that the implication of making an error is huge. So we need to be extremely careful in how to do that, and we're working with partners. We already made it available through our cloud products to various partners who are actually looking to see how to, what are the possibilities to engage and use that in actual way. And extremely exciting opportunities were also recently shared that we're also making it multimodal. So we can actually put in, a Röntgen image and get a result of what's going on there. But let me also switch to other areas that we already have been working on for many years. And AI can be helpful in healthcare in anything from eye diseases to breast cancer to skin diseases, essentially as a way to look and interpret information, image information or textual information. And there are many works already out there that you can see that AI can empower doctors and can empower healthcare systems. Let me finish with one example. Actually, one of our legacy project, I would say. So think about this is Santi, and she lives in rural India, and she suffers from diabetes. In fact, there are 400 million people with diabetes. Now, one of the risks of people with diabetes is that they can have a condition called diabetic retinopathy that is asymptomatic in the early stages. It's treatable, but if you don't treat it, it can lead to blindness. The problem is there's a shortage of over 100,000 doctors, experts, that can actually do the screening. In a landmark paper by my team in 2016, we showed that you can actually have an AI system that is doing screening in par with an expert. But the question is, how do you bring it to the field? And what does it take to bring it to the field? And for many years, I used diabetic retinopathy as a way that to give example of how AI can actually help out people in the clinic. But until I actually see it in my own eyes, no pun intended, I didn't really believe it. So last December, I was actually in Bangkok where there's a deployment actually of that system. And I actually saw how 50 people in the waiting room, they come one by one, sit in front of the camera. 2 minutes later, they are getting diagnosis from AI, 2 minutes, which tells them if they need to get a treatment or not. This diagnosis is in the level of an expert that is not existent. In fact, a month earlier, they needed to wait a few weeks to get a result. It was 20% less accurate because it was done not by an eye expert. And only 1 in 5 followed up on that because by the time they got a result, they already forgot about the screening. Now they can actually follow up immediately. By the time I finished my visit in the clinic, everybody were gone to their home or to the follow-up to take care of themselves. So this is an example of how AI came from the scientific research to the field. Already 200,000 people were screened in India and Thailand, and this is just one example. Think about opportunities to do that for anything from mammography to ultrasound. We can now use our phone to do ultrasound in Africa, in places that otherwise don't have the kind of treatment available. So the power of AI to make it equitable, to make it accessible to everybody, to be preventive, and I didn't even touch on the opportunities that we can have on our watch, on our phone, to get signals, to use AI, to be preventative. This is all a subject for a totally different talk. I think actually we have one later today that is going to touch on that. So the opportunities with AI, I think, are tremendous to make societal changes, to help people, to help the planet, to save lives. As we're working on making it responsible, there's an opportunity to be bold and also and to make a difference in a very profound way. And there's a role for everybody to do that. So I've never seen in history a point that people can, in just a few years, learn a skill and take part of making such a difference to society. I think this opportunity is open for everybody in this room. So thank you very much.